Hi there. Good evening. Actually, good evening if you're in the US. It's 9:30 on Thursday, May 25th, and good morning in India to my friends and colleagues there and family. So, a couple of quick things. I wanted to kind of actually share something a book I've been reading over the last couple of days, and I think since a long time, this is probably the book which has really captivated my attention, and I'm going to talk about it because this is kind of a continuation about some of the theme I've been having for this week, which is the whole area of mindfulness, meditation. And then the book is called Stealing Fire. This is actually an awesome book, Stealing Fire, How Silicon Valley, the Navy SEALs, and maverick scientists are revolutionizing the way we live and work, by Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheal. This is actually a book which I think is kind of, from my perspective, very relevant to some of the thing I'm doing right now. You know, obviously I'm working with Jayo, looking at how do I transform personal well-being and societal well-being. I'm also very honored to be working with Jason Goldsmith, who is a performance coach, and this whole movement called Beyond Performance, along with Tom House, who's a legendary coach, and the movie The Million Dollar Arm was made based on him, and the two kids he took from India to the US and got them into the major leagues, and also Dr. Deepak Chopra. And also I want to give a shout out to the project which I'm working on, which is the mindfulness documentary, to really become the definitive documentary on mindfulness, along with Lee Keckner and Rob Beamer and Dr. Chopra too. So anyway, so the continuing theme of today is how do I understand who you are, understanding yourself. Once you understand who you are, how do you optimize who you are, and then once again, then how do you transform? So reading this book, I think there are a couple of very interesting use cases which I want to talk about today. And one of them is basically, the book starts off with a story of how the Navy SEALs trained, right? So it talks about SEAL Team 6. And then I want to kind of read one particular sentence from the book. It says the hardest part of being a Navy SEAL isn't knowing when to shoot. It's knowing when not to shoot. And there's an example of how Navy SEALs, when they kind of flip the switch and they actually are in the zone, the ability for them to kind of really forget who they are, the ego self, and really become this kind of collective consciousness. So pretty much every single person really understands every other person. They're completely in harmony. And this is what they call group consciousness. And SEAL Team 6 basically say they can merging of the mind to create this collective consciousness. And this is something I think everybody strives to do, right? How do I kind of go beyond myself into this kind of collective consciousness where I'm one with the universe? And the word which I think the book has coined is kind of an interesting word. Talks about ecstasis. Ecstasis is the act of stepping beyond oneself. And Plato described ecstasis as, or ecstasis, or I guess ecstasis, as an altered state where a normal waking consciousness vanishes completely and replaced by an intense euphoria and a powerful connection to a greater intelligence. So I think this is something which fascinates me because, you know, when we talk about SEAL Team 6 or the Navy SEALs, or we talk about the BUDS program, which is the 6-week intensive grueling program, fitness program, not many people really understand what the Navy SEALs actually train on. And the biggest part about the Navy SEAL training is the mind-body connection. And this is really where I think practices like meditation are now being employed, and there's research coming in. And when the SEAL team talks about this concept of collective consciousness, they actually have an entire center as part of their training facility, which is called the Mind Gym, right? And this is where they are kind of trained with using different techniques, basically being wired with HRV monitors, EEG, EKG, being in sleep deprivation tanks, to really look at how can you put the mind in an altered state where you can basically learn. Let's say you took about 3 months to learn a language, they want to learn it in 3 weeks, right? So what they call is the ability for us to switch on demand and access these non-altered states of consciousness. We all know that, in fact, Jason Goldsmith talks about it when he kind of talks about golf coaching and things like that. It's about being in this ability to access your subconscious mind. Your conscious mind basically can process about 120 bits of information. If you're listening to somebody talking, like me, it's 60 bits of information. If you're listening to two people talking, you're pretty much done, right? But when your ability to tap into the subconscious or the subconscious mind, your ability to then access billions of bits of information. And the panacea for all of us is to figure out how do we kind of tap into this altered state of consciousness on demand, right? And this is what separates the elite athletes, the elite, I would say the elite Navy SEALs and things like that. People who have kind of gone beyond ability for them to alter this, they kind of tap into this switch. So the book kind of starts with the Navy SEALs training program, and then it kind of gets into the whole area of what is happening in corporate America. How is Google now recruiting their top talent, going beyond GPAs and really looking at scores and performance and education, to really going and understanding what's happening at Burning Man. What are people doing to kind of tap into this altered state of consciousness where they can become elite leaders, elite athletes, artists, musicians, and they talk about the Google's GPAUSE program. So it's pretty interesting. I think this is an interesting book. So once again, Stealing Fire. But moving on, one of the things I want to talk about, one of the chapters they talk about is this non-ordinary states of consciousness. So what happens when you tap into this non-ordinary states of consciousness? And typically it's the ability for us to basically harness on demand 6 neurochemicals. They talk them, these are the 6 neurochemicals. I'm not an expert in this area, but I definitely want to at least mention the 6 neurochemicals today. One is serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, endorphins, anandamide, and oxytocin. What we call the 6 powerful neurochemicals. And what happens when we are in the state of this non-ordinary states of consciousness, ability for us to kind of tap into these things, into these powerful chemicals which are basically secreted in the body. Obviously, dopamine is the romantic or the love hormones. Endorphins and oxytocins link us to the mother-child, friend-to-friend bonding. Serotonin is all about intimacy. And what happens when these 6 neurochemicals are emitted from the body, we basically have a heightened sense of cooperation. So once again, this is an interesting area to look at, I think, for all of us. If you're looking at leading a team or leading a baseball team or leading a corporation or an organization, how do we build communities? So the book moves on and talks about 4 signature characteristics of this particular domain, and the acronym is called STER, S-T-E-R. The first one is selflessness. Selflessness is basically our ability to move beyond our ego identity. It's not about me, it's about we. When you are in the state of selflessness, you're connected to the entire universe, right? The second characteristic is called timelessness. When you're in the state of the non-ordinary state of consciousness, you're able to trigger the perpetual present. You're always in the present. When you're always in the present, then your ability to kind of tap into the most reliable data. You're not caught up with time. So the second attribute is timelessness. The third attribute is effortlessness, which is basically the ability for us to go beyond, to go past our normal boundaries and tap into this passion or the state of flow, which is this effortlessness. And the last one, which I talked about, is richness, which is ability for us to tap into this altered state of consciousness where we are no longer limited by this conscious mind, which is about 120 bits per minute, 120 bits, but to really go into basically this unconscious mind, which is billions of bits, right? So this is something, once again, to reiterate, is looking into how do we kind of get into this, how do we tap into this kind of non-ordinary states of consciousness on demand, like how the Navy SEALs do it, or what Google's trying to get their elite leaders to kind of tap into on demand, going to Burning Man festival to get inspiration. And how do you kind of tap into the 6, what they call neurochemicals, how do you produce them? And one of the things which we all know about is that, there are many different ways to consciously alter, consciousness altering techniques, but the most safe one is meditation, right? Meditation, I think I guess in the past, the yoga, Tai Chi, mind body, these are all different ways to tap into the conscious altering techniques. Obviously, there are many different ways. If you look at different traditions, there are rituals and there is isolation tanks, there's tantric sex, breath work, martial arts, and then also psychedelic drugs. There are all kinds of ways people have tried. But I think definitely one of the ways which we can say is kind of safe, has been proven for thousands and thousands of years, is meditation, mindfulness practices to really tap into this to this conscious altering techniques. So that's something which I think I wanted to kind of talk about today, and why this book, Stealing Fire, is really awesome. Once again, check it out. I think it's out there. I think I highly recommend everybody pick up this book, give it a shot. What else? I want to kind of talk about a couple of other things which I found quite fascinating in this book. Okay, yeah, this is one use case. So Carly Rogers is an occupational therapist, and she was working with the veterans, Iraq War veterans at Camp Pendleton. And what she was trying to do was how do we get people, the veterans suffering from PTSD, to kind of really alter their state of consciousness. And she came up with something, a blended model, which is basically using surfing, right? Which is a very, very reliable flow trigger, and then talk therapy. So basically using surfing, she was able to kind of come up with a very non-intrusive way or non-pharmacological intervention to use it as a technique to help soldiers and veterans with PTSD. By the way, hi Lee. I think Lee's online, Josie's online, so hello. What else? So the military study found that 84% of PTSD subjects who meditated for a month could reduce or stop taking what they call SSRI, which are selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, right? This is pretty powerful. 84% of PTSD subjects who meditated for a month could reduce or stop taking medication. How powerful is that? So this is something, if that works for PTSD, and this is a study by the military, I think each one of us can benefit a lot from these practices. And that's really something, I think we all require data. So one of my things I want to do is to share as much information I come across. And this is the second interesting point. The control group who did not meditate and stayed on antidepressants experienced 20% worsening of PTSD. So this is really a powerful study which we can kind of take into mind when we're talking about how do we leverage these powerful mind-body techniques which have been proven over the years, right? What else? Okay, so what happens when we pray or we meditate, right? So this is an interesting phenomenon. During ecstatic prayer or meditation, energy normally used for drawing the boundary of self gets reallocated for attention. When this happens, we can no longer distinguish self from the other. At that moment, as far as the brain can tell, you are one with everything. And this is really, really powerful, because this is what happens when you're in prayer or in meditation, or you're really in an ecstatic dance. And I was reading something earlier today about ecstatic Kabbalah, where actually there's a technique in which you use sound and movement to really get into this altered state of consciousness. So once again, we can actually do all of this with meditation, prayer. So this is also another interesting research where extreme concentration, the right parietal lobe shuts down. And when this happens, actually able to kind of focus, right? So this is interesting examples how we can leverage some of the things which we have access to today, which I think we live in an amazing time. So what are the four forces for us to kind of leverage to kind of reach the state of ecstasis? One is psychology, understanding ourselves. Second was neurobiology, understanding how our body operates, the neuroscience behind it. The third one is pharmacology, understanding the chemicals, the neurochemicals in the body. And this is a whole area of very plant-based medicine and things like that. And the last one is technology, advances in ECG, EEG, things like VR are playing a big role. So this is pretty much, I think, what I want to talk about today is to really talk about how can we kind of tap into this collective consciousness, how can you flip that switch where we can use techniques to get into a state of flow on demand and without using I would say, invasive or chemicals, but really using some of these proven techniques of meditation, mindfulness, which have been proven over the years. So once again, check it out. I love this book. I think this one book has really caught my attention. Stealing Fire. Jason Goldsmith, thanks a lot for introducing me to this book. And once again, I would appreciate if you all could go back and support our a documentary, The Mindfulness Movement, on Indiegogo. And this is a crowdfunding campaign, and every single person's contribution is going to go a long way. So thanks a lot for everybody in India and other parts of Asia. Good morning. And for the rest of the world, Europe and US, good evening, and have a wonderful day. Thank you. Bye-bye.